Our hero lived his life as a mercenary, only to be killed on the battlefield. He wished for a chance at a new life, where he had the right potential. His wish was granted, and he awoke in the body of a trash son from one of the Empire's strongest families. Our hero decided to seize this opportunity to reach the pinnacle, and by leveraging the knowledge from his past life, he resolved to transform this useless body into the greatest in the Empire. The story begins on a battlefield strewn with the dead, where our hero remarks that a mercenary who always survives without dying is considered a third-rate mercenary. He explains that the reason mercenaries get paid so much is that their work is based on risking their lives on the front lines. He adds that their true value lies in their willingness to die for their masters. He admits that, as a mercenary, he is forced every day to listen to his employer's words and provocations and endure them in silence. He comments sarcastically on himself, saying there is nothing he can do but accept the reality. And he summarizes all of the above in one sentence, that this is simply the life of a mercenary. Our hero Jake appears addressing someone in front of him, saying that all nobles look the same in his eyes. He explains that when a noble needs someone to fight on their side, they make big promises, speak kindly, and pledge rewards and titles. But as soon as circumstances change, the nobles change their tune immediately and get creative with excuses and lies. Then he says that what he just heard from the commander beats everything he has heard before and asks him if he really misunderstood him. The red-haired commander replies, confirming that he did not hear wrong. The commander clearly says that he asked Jake and his men to die. Nothing more, nothing less. At that, Jake smiles a sarcastic smile and asks him if he has forgotten who he is. The commander answers that he knows him well. He is Jake, leader of the Fang's mercenaries. Jake laughs and says he didn't know the commander had a sense of humor because he is making this request while knowing exactly who he is addressing. He continues that unless the commander is joking, he wouldn't issue an order to a mere trivial mercenary to fight and die with the honor of a noble knight. The commander retreats a little and admits he was reckless with his words, then apologizes if he gave the wrong impression. Jake replies, surprised by the phrase wrong impression. The commander clarifies that he didn't mean to insult him, but only wants to entrust him with a final mission. He explains that their repeated defeats against the rebels have made their fate almost sealed, and that Jake knows this himself. Then he adds that the rebels' swords have now reached the threshold of the Crawford family, the protectors of this land for generations. The commander admits that his realization that there is nowhere to run made him ramble uselessly. Jake replies that if that's all, he understands the situation well given the current circumstances. He thinks to himself that it is time to withdraw. If the man said to possess the greatest talent in the Empire is cornered like this, it indicates the battle is lost. Yet he admits he is a decent noble compared to others. He wonders about the nature of this final mission amidst this chaos, thinking the commander might want him to scout an escape route, considering it the last job before getting his final pay. Then the commander explains the mission clearly, telling him that the rebels will launch an all-out attack tomorrow and asking Jake to stand with him to hold them off for just a little while. The commander defines the purpose of this, which is to hold out until his master escapes safely, or at least fight until he himself falls dead in battle. Then he takes out a red gem and says he will settle all accounts with it, asking Jake to take it when he retreats with his men. But Jake slaps his hand, causing the gem to fall to the ground, knowing that a gem of this size is enough to cover his squad's expenses for 3 years. The commander explodes in anger and asks him what he is doing, to which Jake replies that the real question is what the commander thinks of him. He tells him that his orders actually mean turning them into human shields. Even if they join the fight and hold out for a short time, those remaining will fall, and no one will be able to flee. He continues that even if a miracle happens and they manage to hold out for a moment, the rebels won't let them leave alive, then asks him sarcastically if he really believes the enemies would let them go after that. The commander explains to Jake calmly that his men are not knights, but mercenaries, and that the enemy knows this well and treats them on this basis. Jake replies with a smile that this is true. To the world, they are just an ordinary mercenary squad, but the commander knows the truth better than anyone. Jake clarifies that to the rebels, the Fang squad are not just mercenaries but a sworn enemy they wish to tear to pieces. We cut to a previous scene in the forest. A quiet battlefield filled with corpses appears before some of the dead begin to move, who are in fact Jake's men in disguise. One of them suddenly rises and stabs a knight from behind with a treacherous blow, revealing that the mercenaries were pretending to be dead to hunt down enemy commanders. The screams of the knights rise as they realize too late that what is happening is an organized ambush, so one of them orders his soldiers to prepare for combat after being fooled by this dirty trick. One of the commanders on horseback screams angrily, accusing the mercenaries of having no honor because they pretended to be dead soldiers just to betray their opponents. This commander doesn't even get the chance to finish his sentence. He falls by a surprise blow while still talking about honor. The scene ends with his body lying on the ground amidst other corpses, in an image that summarizes the cruelty of the Fang's tactics on the battlefield. The narrative returns to the present, where Jake recalls that he has cut the throats of countless commanders over the years, and that is the only reason his squad has stayed alive until now. He approaches the noble commander and tells him that the rebels currently outside the walls have their blood boiling for revenge for all the commanders the Fangs have killed. Then he looks up at him skeptically, asking if he had calculated this point as well within his plan, and if he really intends to use the mercenary squad as bait to draw the rebels' attention. The commander replies coldly that he asked for nothing but for Jake to carry out his mission as promised, and that this is all he hopes from him. He adds with a clear threat that if Jake refuses to cooperate, he will have no choice but to cut off his head personally and take command of the Fang squad himself. Jake steps back quickly while staring at the commander with anger, admitting that he thought he was a little different from the rest of the nobles. Then he declares with bitterness that the disappointing truth is that this commander is the vilest and filthiest of them all in the end. The commander surprises him by saying he is sorry, confirming his apology is sincere, though he still insists on his stance. Jake tells him there is no need to be sorry. After all the slaughter of commanders he has done, cutting off the head of another noble and presenting it to the army camped outside will never leave a bitter taste in his mouth. The commander picks up on the idea and asks him mockingly if he plans to offer his head to the rebels and beg them to spare your lives. Jake admits that if it were up to him, he would do so without hesitation. But he knows the commander has already taken precautions, so the mercenaries cannot escape that easily. Jake contemplates the situation as the leader of an entire squad, recalling the idea that it is his duty to do everything in his power until the last moment, and that the rebels won't believe a commander coming to them empty-handed asking them to have mercy on his men. When the commander hears the word two, he suddenly realizes that Jake was thinking of offering 2 heads instead of 1, and asks him in astonishment if he intends to sacrifice his own head as well, just for his men. Jake admits that he is the one who dragged all these men behind him, driven by his personal ambition, after promising them he would raise them from the bottom of society as mercenaries to glory and reputation. He adds that they trusted him and followed him to this point, so he sees it as natural to bear the responsibility alone, whatever the cost. He faces the commander with steady eyes and concludes his words with one sentence that summarizes his stance: "Because I am their leader." The commander laughs a short, tense laugh, then admits that this is indeed the true meaning of leadership. He lowers his head in regret and says it is truly a pity. If circumstances were different, he would have wished for Jake to be his master, whom he swore to serve. After these heavy words, Jake launches an attack, ready to fight to the end, facing a man he respects and despises at the same time. Their gazes meet for a final moment, before the commander mutters inwardly as he faces Jake's attack, "Don't forgive me, Jake." The decisive blow is struck in the castle courtyard. Blood splatters, while Jake realizes deep down that he saw this fate coming from the start. The hero realizes that the difference in power between him and his opponent was far more massive than he imagined, accepting this truth with bitterness as he curses the talent that decided the battle. He falls to the ground soaked in his blood, but feels a strange relief and whispers to himself that this ending isn't bad. He feels internally reassured because he had ordered his men to withdraw if he didn't return by the set time, so he feels he can now die in peace, especially since he was always prepared for such an end. However, he leaves behind one question haunting him. If he had received the same opportunities his opponent had, what could his life have been like, and how far could he have reached? As his consciousness drowns in darkness, he genuinely wonders about the ceiling he could have reached had he not been born at the bottom, before everything extinguishes completely. In the darkness, distant voices begin to leak into his ear, a repeated call begging him to wake up, so his consciousness stirs again. He opens his eyes to the face of a young man standing over him in a bright room, screaming in fear, "Master, please wake up." The hero stares at him with a confused look as if he doesn't know him. The young man beside him raises his hand high, and suddenly brings it down on his face, screaming for him to wake up. He touches his cheek in astonishment and protests internally. Was he really just slapped? He searches with his eyes for who dared to treat him like this, finding the young man himself crying and wiping his tears while asking him to regain consciousness and calm down. When the young man addresses him by the title Little Master Lucian, he freezes in place. The name is strange to him, but he realizes this call is directed at him. He sits up in bed stunned, feeling there is a major mistake. Everything around him, from the soft bed to the luxurious room, resembles nothing of his previous harsh world. He looks at his hand and discovers that the body he is moving now is not his hardened, scar-filled body, but the soft body of a young man who has known neither the harshness of training nor war. He turns to the orange-haired young man clinging to the bed crying and wonders to himself with annoyance, who is this boy anyway? And why does he speak as if he is a servant attached to him? The young man catches his breath and says in terror that he thought the little master had completely lost his head in that incident, and that the matter would have brought disaster upon the whole family. He kneels before the bed, repeating that what happened would have led to all of their executions. The young man continues talking about family, home, and reputation, while the hero listens in grim silence, thinking that everything this servant says has nothing to do with the life he knows. Most importantly, he clearly remembers the moment of his death. He remembers the sword that cut his body, and how he fell a fall no human could survive. He touches his neck in amazement, wondering, if he had indeed died in that way, how is his head still attached to his body now without a scratch? Silence prevails in the room for moments, before he begins to arrange his thoughts. He looks around carefully and deduces that everything he sees points to only one result. He stands from the bed cautiously and decides he is no longer in his original body, but has entered the body of someone else entirely, a little master from a noble family. He advances towards the mirror and looks at his reflection, finding the face of a handsome young man with soft features. He comments with light sarcasm that he got a face that is both a killer and a charmer at the same time. He examines the spacious room, the luxurious furniture, and the heavy curtains, becoming more certain that he is in a mansion belonging to a wealthy family and that the body he now inhabits undoubtedly belongs to the continent's nobility. From the way the servants address him and the luxury of the place, he deduces he is an heir to a family overflowing with money and tries to remember the name the young man called him earlier. He turns to the servant, calls him Hans, and tells him he has a question. The servant becomes flustered and places his hand on his chest, answering respectfully that he is ready to hear what the master wants. The hero asks him directly, "What year are we in now?" Hans stammers slightly, then answers that it is Imperial Year 846, and the hero freezes from the impact of the number. He calculates quickly in his head and realizes that this date precedes the day of his death by a full 15 years, understanding that he has returned to the past in another person's body. He mutters that he doesn't know exactly how this happened, but if he continues to be shocked, his amazement will never end, so he breathes deeply and decides to accept the new reality. He makes up his mind and stares with sharp eyes, telling himself that first he must focus on what needs to be done now. Then he addresses his servant with steadiness and decides to handle the matter. The hero explodes in Hans's face with anger, treating his previous behavior as a direct insult to his master, making the servant tremble with fear as if he had committed a mortal sin. The hero reminds his servant of the status between master and servant and scolds him for daring to touch his master's body while he was unconscious, then demands he answer clearly what he wants to know. He asks him suddenly about his identity, surprising Hans, and confusion appears on his face as he processes the question. He is forced to answer in the end, telling him that he is the noble Lucien Waldeck, and that he is the third son of the great house of Waldeck, one of the most ancient families in the empire. The hero freezes upon hearing the name, trying to verify he heard correctly, for the information he just received shakes his entire understanding of his new situation. He remembers the family crest fluttering on the banners and recalls the image of the massive Waldeck mansion in his mind, linking the name he heard with what he already knows about this family. He recalls what he knows about the Waldeck family. It is a pillar of the empire, a family with a long history, always placing its men in the ranks closest to the throne and the emperor. He confirms to himself that this family possesses influence nearing that of the imperial family itself, and realizes he has fallen into one of the greatest houses on the continent. He comments inwardly that he knows the conditions of this family well, for the Waldeck mansion was not a strange place to him in the past, but an important station in his previous life. He remembers the period he worked as a guard in this mansion for several years, and remembers himself in a guard's uniform standing in the corridors, just a simple follower amidst this opulence. He compares the past and the present. From the moment of his death, he thought he would return to his old job as a mercenary or guard, but he wakes up to suddenly find himself the third son of the Waldeck family. He sees what is happening as complete absurdity. The world that humiliated him because of his low status now suddenly puts him in a noble's body, causing an old feeling of bitterness to boil within him. All the insults he had to endure in his previous life simply for being from a lower-class float to his memory, remembering how he was trampled upon in almost every situation. He recalls the image of his body stained with mud and blood walking among graves at night, only because his social standing was at rock bottom compared to the nobles. He wonders with bitter sarcasm why fate granted him a chance like this only now, after he spent his previous life under the weight of contempt and disdain. He remembers the question that kept haunting him before his death. If he had the same opportunities the nobles possess, how high could he have climbed, and what magnitude of power would he have reached? He vows inwardly to exploit this opportunity to its fullest and to climb to the highest status this noble identity can carry him to. And on a bright morning, he opens the windows to the sunlight and breathes deeply, while deciding clearly that he will not be content with just living in this mansion, but will learn how to live as a true noble. The narrative moves inside the luxurious mansion under the shining chandeliers. The hero wanders the corridors, comparing this place to all the locations he visited as a mercenary, admitting to himself that Waldeck surpasses them all in luxury. He realizes he must get used to this level of luxury quickly, not to be captivated by it, but because it has become the stage of the new life in which he will build his future. He notices from the moment he stepped out of his room that the servants and workers are looking at him with strange looks, neither normal nor comfortable, feeling there is something amiss in their view of the house's third son. He inquires from Hans about the matter, and the servant answers that it is natural. The little master locked himself away from everyone for a long time, seeing no one but his personal servant. He learns through Hans's words that the previous Lucian remained in total isolation for nearly a year and 2 months, a prisoner in his room, as if the whole mansion had forgotten his existence. He wonders to himself about the reason for this behavior. The owner of this body possessed everything any human dreams of, yet chose to shrink into a dark corner instead of using what he had. He thinks that even if the noble's way of thinking is strange, life in this mansion did not allow any individual to behave as they pleased without limits or supervision. He remembers that this place is ruled by one man with his presence and weight, Grand Duke Sigmund Waldeck, the military giant who protected the empire for many years. He knows that a figure this powerful would not stand idly by and let his son rot in his room without reason, becoming more convinced that behind Lucian's isolation lies a hidden story. He places 2 possibilities before him. Either the third son was such a big problem that the family effectively abandoned him, or special circumstances made the Grand Duke overlook his state for an unknown reason. He decides he needs to meet the master of this house himself to understand the truth, but before he can take any step, the head butler appears before him, welcoming him warmly after a full year of absence, confirming he is extremely happy to see him again. The head butler checks on Lucian's physical condition and asks if he feels any difficulty moving, while Hans bows anxiously, and the hero remembers that the Waldeck family owns such an important person responsible for everything in the mansion. This man is identified as head butler Aiden, who entered the mansion in his childhood as a hostage from a hostile family, but thanks to his competence became the primary official for all the house's affairs. Eden is described as the right hand of Grand Duke Sigmund, the man who enjoyed his full trust. The hero feels nervous because he has to deal with this specific person. He decides to rely on the fact that the butler hasn't seen Lucian for a year and starts acting like the only noble he knows, and that is the captain of the guard from his previous life. So he thanks the head butler for his concern politely. He assures him that his health has improved much compared to how it was. He announces that he came out today to inspect the family conditions and matters he neglected during his long isolation, seeing that meeting the head butler directly at this time is good luck for him. He asks him calmly if any changes occurred within the family during his disappearance, and the head butler answers after a short hesitation that everything is proceeding as usual, and the family is still as it was without noteworthy exceptional events. The hero comments with a light laugh that Eden's presence at the head of the mansion's administration is enough to prevent mistakes, watching inwardly the way the head butler looks at him, noting he doesn't seem to have any suspicion regarding his different behavior. He feels reassured he wasn't exposed, convincing himself he was worried unnecessarily, then decides to return to his room, pretending to be tired after his first exit from isolation in a long time. Before he moves, Eden stops him respectfully and asks him not to return to his room immediately, so the hero feels something important is being prepared for him. The head butler clarifies that someone in the mansion wishes to see him at this specific moment, making the hero realize this meeting cannot be evaded. The scene shifts to the main office in the mansion, where Grand Duke Sigmund sits behind his massive desk, and Lucian stands before him sensing the weight of this first confrontation with the true master of the house. Sigmund opens the conversation with a formal address to his third son, asking him to answer a specific question, while Lucian stands in his place anticipating what is to come. The Duke asks his shocking question directly, wondering about the reason his son remains alive, as if the natural order of things is for him to be inevitably dead. The hero is shocked by these words and tries to comprehend their meaning. Sigmund continues his scolding, explaining he intended to overlook many of his son's actions after the mother's death, even though he used his grief as an excuse to abandon his duties. He accuses him of crossing the line when he locked the door on himself for over a full year, turning his isolation into a sort of silent protest against the whole family. Then he reveals the most dangerous problem is that the previous Lucian didn't stop at isolation, but disregarded his life itself and tried to harm himself, which is unforgivable in the Duke's eyes. The hero freezes hearing about the attempt to self-harm, not understanding at first what his father means specifically, before starting to connect the events he experienced since waking up. He remembers Hans's tears and trembling in the room that morning, realizing the servant's fear wasn't from a mere ordinary fall, but from the possibility of his master losing his life again in the same way. Lucian tries to calm the situation and hint at a misunderstanding, but realizes Sigmund won't accept shallow excuses, especially after all this accumulation of previous behaviors. The Duke finally demands he reveal clearly what is going on in his head and not hide anything anymore, as if granting him a last chance to explain everything that happened. Sigmund points out that everything that took place seemed like a deliberate plan from the start, speaking of his son's weak body used in a reckless act that cannot be justified. The Duke reveals that what angered him was the attempt to swallow sleeping pills with the aim of causing a stir inside the mansion, and that he wants to hear from his son himself the reason that drove him to that. In that moment, the hero comprehends the full truth, understanding that the reason he woke up in this body without previous memories is that the original Lucian actually died after the pill incident, and that what he is living now is a continuation in a time that should have ended. Memory takes him back to his past as a guard in this mansion 15 years ago, when he only heard of the Duke's third son from afar, and that he no longer existed for reasons not clearly announced. He remembers how Lucian was referred to at that time as the third son of the Waldeck family, and how he learned later that this son's life ended early in a mysterious way. He recalls the years he worked in the mansion, where he met the Duke's other sons and their mothers more than once, while he never saw Lucian or his mother face to face, making their existence closer to a shadow, hidden from everyone's eyes. The picture becomes clear to him now. The mother died of illness early on, then the son followed her a short while later due to a mysterious incident, making Lucian's existence in this body akin to hacking a story that was supposed to have ended long ago. He recalls that in the past, he thought the mother and son's isolation was merely due to their poor health, but now he realizes there was a very different, real reason. It turns out that the mother's death, Lucian's fragile position within the family, and all the accompanying stress and pressure were a psychological burden too heavy for a child of his age to bear. In the end, the old Lucian chose to take sleeping pills at a dose just slightly less than lethal, as a sort of silent scream for the Grand Duke's attention and notice. During his isolation, which lasted over a year, his body had severely weakened, and he hadn't calculated the drug's effect on this deteriorated state, so he was unable to withstand its full impact. The result was a sudden death in his bed, ending the existence of the Waldeck family's third son that night without anyone realizing the true extent of his despair. The scene returns to the present, where our hero finds himself in a bind. The scolding the Duke directed at his son after a full year of absence seemed extremely harsh, even for a father who hadn't seen his son all this time. He thinks that what the Duke said reached a point where this sharp tone has become normal within the house, then wonders to himself how things turned out this way, even for a great Duke. However, he admits that Sigmund's heart must be boiling inside. No matter how high his status as a Duke, he remains a father standing before a child he almost lost forever. On the other hand, the hero realizes this isn't the right moment to sympathize with his father's feelings. He himself is standing on the edge of a precipice and doesn't have the luxury of humoring anyone. He recalls the word last that came out of the Duke's mouth and understands that what he received wasn't just a simple scolding, but a final ultimatum threatening his entire future. He imagines his future cracking beneath his feet, as if his golden path toward a new life has already begun to crumble, and it all depends now on the answer he provides in this moment. He thinks that if he says one word that doesn't please the Grand Duke, he might end up with an inescapable punishment that topples everything he dreams of for a new beginning. The first possibility crosses his mind: being exiled to a distant monastery as a reclusive priest, forced to cut ties with the outside world and live in isolation until the end of his life. Then he imagines a harsher possibility: being sent to a remote region filled with monsters, to struggle there for survival in miserable conditions as punishment for his previous luxury and laziness, living the rest of his life in constant misery. He rejects these scenarios internally, reminding himself that he snatched this new life from the jaws of death after his neck was actually severed, and therefore he never intends to be lenient in preserving his future. He gathers his resolve and decides not to let other families' feuds or side conflicts destroy this golden opportunity he finally obtained. After being asked to clarify what is in his heart, he chooses to face the matter directly, admitting his mistake in sullying the Waldeck family name with his reckless actions, and acknowledging that he caused his father great anxiety. He offers a full, formal apology for everything he did in the past, and expresses his regret clearly, in a stance completely different from the evasive image the family knew of him before. He declares that the responsibility lies with him alone without any excuses, and shows his readiness to bear any punishment imposed on him in a serious attempt to close the chapter of the past. The Duke replies that a mere apology changes nothing of what happened, and prepares to continue his decisive speech, making the hero feel that the final judgment is approaching. But instead of retreating, the hero holds his ground, seeing that what is past cannot be fixed, and that continuing to dwell on the past will only bring more misery to both parties. Therefore, he declares that he does not want to remain that weak person who is on the verge of death, but prefers to look forward to what can be built from this moment on. He confirms his determination to live seriously for the sake of the future and to work hard to be worthy of the name he carries and the position he suddenly found himself in. And after clarifying his decision, he asks his father indirectly to treat him this time as a son who needs a simple push forward, not as a duke trying a servant, asking him for just one word of encouragement to support him on his new path. Then he continues that a son who admits his mistake to his parents sincerely should naturally find a welcoming heart and open arms, for this is the true duty between a parent and his child. He wonders if the father-son bond, which heaven ordained, shouldn't translate into forgiveness and another chance when he sees true regret before him. In the background, Eden watches what is happening in astonishment. He had sensed a change in the room's atmosphere earlier, but the clear shift in Lucian's way of speaking makes him unable to believe what he is hearing. He compares this confident young man facing the Duke now to the third son who used to shrink in fear in the past, asking himself if this person is really Lucian himself. Silence prevails for moments, and nothing is heard but nervous heartbeats, while the gazes of father and son meet in an unspoken dialogue that holds everyone's breath. The Duke clenches his fist while boiling inside, asking how he dares to raise his voice before him and remind him of the duties of fatherhood. The Grand Duke realizes quietly that what happened with Lucian shook his convictions. After a long life during which he thought he had seen everything, he discovers his son is still capable of surprising him. In return, Lucian feels relief, realizing his previous words hit the mark and affected his father, so he relaxes with his heart pounding, convinced his plan succeeded. He reflects on the method of confrontation he chose, concluding that a direct clash with the Duke is far more beneficial than groveling and hesitation, and that boldness is the language this man understands. He describes him as a man who appreciates the spirit of a wild dog attacking steadily more than he appreciates a mouse walking on eggshells, fearing every step. Sigmund admits to him that after returning from the edge of death, he has become bolder than he was. After the atmosphere calmed down, the Duke opens the topic of the future seriously and asks his son what he intends to do from now on, since he is the one who spoke of work and diligence first. Lucian defines his primary priority, deciding to start by fixing his weak, fragile body and to make strengthening his physique the starting point of his new life. While planning this, scenes from his previous life as a warrior pass before his eyes, and memories of battlefields and the grueling training that honed his body in the past return to him, and the crushing defeat he met at the hands of the guard captain. From here, he chooses his path clearly. He wants to learn to use the sword again in this life, but this time as a son of the House of Waldeck, not just a mercenary. The Duke is surprised by this weak body's desire to wield a sword, but hears from Lucian an insistence on getting rid of the body's weakness first, then catching up with the rest of the knights later. The son lays out his plan simply, focusing on eating, sleeping, and taking care of himself regularly until he improves. The Duke contemplates his words, then admits to himself that this boy has a special way of speaking and persuading. Sigmund decides not to judge now, but to watch what the son will do in reality, then orders the head butler to give him a certain thing again to be of aid to him in the next step. Eden understands the signal immediately, realizing that what he will present to the third son now will be more useful than any other show of force, so he prepares to execute his master's orders precisely. The head butler bows in agreement, vowing that this matter will be prepared as quickly as possible so Lucian can use it immediately. Meanwhile, Lucian wonders to himself what thing they are talking about, not yet knowing the nature of the gift the Duke decided to grant him. The shot shifts to outside the palace, where the courtyard is bustling with activity, workers carrying heavy boxes and moving between carriages. When the boxes are opened, piles of gold and money shine before Lucian and Hans's eyes, leaving them stunned by the magnitude of wealth that appeared all at once, until the matter seems to him exaggerated to the point of absurdity. He contemplates the scene, wondering to himself if this is what it means to be a high noble, realizing that what he is receiving now is nothing but a monthly allowance considered massive by his previous standards. He sits afterwards in front of the pile of coins on the table, confirming that this entire amount is allocated for just 1 month, and his mind begins calculating possibilities and what he can do with all these resources. His expression changes to clear excitement. With this amount of money, he sees the experiment is worth it and decides to utilize it fully in his greatest project, rebuilding this weak body from scratch. He draws a plan in his imagination to create what he calls the elixir, a special blend aimed at strengthening the body, summoning his previous experience with herbs and rare materials to realize the idea is feasible with this funding. In another scene inside the glass house filled with flowers, the Grand Duke walks accompanied by Eden in the place that was dear to the late Duchess's heart. The head butler remembers that his master avoided visiting this place for a long time after his wife's passing, and understands that his return to it today is undoubtedly linked to the clear change in Lucian's behavior. Eden contemplates the relationship between father and son. Even if the Duke distanced himself from the third son for a period, the current change in the young man's personality has stirred feelings everyone thought had frozen. He recalls the image of the Duke in the past with his wife in this same place, and how his love for her was so deep he couldn't face her grave later, seeing that those old wounds still affect the way he deals with his son. His thoughts are interrupted by the Duke's voice starting to speak, saying his son was always pathetic, claiming to be busy as if running from something. And he would start whimpering like a wild dog if he raised his voice at him slightly, so his actions were completely different from his mother, and the only resemblance between them was in appearance. But for the first time today, he felt he was wrong. He concludes the conversation by confirming that the son's gaze today was steady and honest, as he expressed his opinion before him, and Eden agrees that the young man seemed decisive and confident. Eden continues that young Master Lucian has a tender heart and is a deep thinker, which is why he seemed hesitant for a moment compared to the other young masters, adding that in the end, he inherited his master's blood. The Duke smiles a faint smile, commenting that this remains to be seen. He adds that the tasks that will be placed before this child from now on are matters that cannot be solved with a few words, but Eden intervenes to point out there is one problem. Eden tells his master that he resumed the support funds that had been stopped for young Master Lucian, but it was confirmed that some of these funds were leaked outside. And after investigation, it seems the second young master, Geordie Waldeck, is involved in the matter. Furthermore, Geordie fired the head maid, who was assisting the third young master, and placed one of his close associates in her place, revealing a clear intention to keep him under surveillance. The Duke comments with disgust that Geordie is a capable child, but his problem lies in his narrow-mindedness. He adds that he understands Geordie's deep feelings against his third brother due to matters regarding his mother's family, but he didn't expect him to be this persistent. Eden suggests taking separate measures, but the Duke refuses, asking his head butler not to interfere in this matter, even though Eden sees this might be too harsh for someone who just started taking his first steps. The Duke describes what is happening as a petty trick that wouldn't have succeeded had Lucian managed his surroundings properly, considering this the price the third pays for not regaining his senses during the past year. He sees the current situation as perfectly suitable to observe how that child will deal with the matter this time. If he cannot handle this, there will be no reason to pin hopes on him. For in the end, even if the Waldeck family blood becomes the key, opening the door must always be done by the person's own hands. A few days later, the servants in the mansion wonder why the young master is locked in his room again. Hans feels anxious and tense, for this is the third day since the support funds arrived. The young master told him the support resumed because his talk with the Grand Duke went well. But considering the relationship between the two, Hans realizes it wasn't easy at all, and that his master must have gathered immense courage. And now he intends to move forward, even if he has to turn his back on grief. Hans is moved by this change. In his room, Lucian looks at the pile of gold and thinks enthusiastically that this amount is worth the attempt. With this money, he can completely fix this weak body and create that elixir inside his room, which smells of herbs and fumes. He notes that Hans must be full of curiosity, but sees his good guarding of the door as proof of his loyalty. He gathered brewing tools a duke's son wouldn't touch in his life, and an expensive herb because it only grows under moonlight, and its common use hasn't been proven yet, which is the moonlight herb, on which he spent his entire allowance. He remembers ordering Hans to buy this herb, admitting he might look crazy right now, but he knows that, in just 1 year from now, its price will rise 10 times, indeed more than 20 times. Its price will rise insanely. He remembers the boldness of the Alchemist Guild. At that stage, the success of the elixir must not have been clear, but they gathered all the moonlight herbs in the Empire. It was the gamble of a lifetime on the Guild's fate, and thanks to that boldness, they succeeded in developing the Nectar of the Gods, the unprecedented elixir that shook the Empire. And because of the arrogance of mentioning the word God for a mere medicine, they faced the risk of being accused of heresy. But once its effectiveness became known, everyone was busy praising it as if nothing had happened. Lucian smiles a sly smile, holding the glowing red vial of elixir. The Nectar of the Gods shattered an axiom that hadn't been refuted for over 1,000 years, which is that a martial artist's world is determined the moment they are born, and that this limit is an absolute law no one can challenge, for innate nature is destiny, and physical constitution never changes. And what smashed this prevailing logic to smithereens was the nectar. Once the nectar was drunk, even those with no talent transformed into useful swordsmen. Of course, Lucian realizes that what he made is far less effective than the original, and nothing more than a mass-produced copy. But to rebuild a body this dilapidated, there is nothing better than it right now. Then he mutters to himself, addressing the original Lucian's body, saying he should consider himself lucky. He recalls that later, when a chaotic era began across the Empire, the first thing that burned was the Alchemist's Guild, simply because the recipe for the nectar that shook the balance of power was too dangerous in itself. Thanks to that, the recipe vanished from the world. However, he managed to gather some clues and make something similar somehow. He admits that most who tried like him died from side effects, Then he decides to stop talking and downs the elixir in one gulp. What is important from now on is mana, the result of humans converting the force of nature into their own power. Depending on how well this power is circulated, spread throughout the body and recovered, the quality and performance of the power one can draw out differs starkly. Currently, he is borrowing the nectar's power to forcibly expand the blocked pathways inside the body. But even if the pathways open, he wonders why there is no bodily resistance or pain, which should occur when accepting mana. On the contrary, mana spreads without obstacles, as if finding its rightful place, which is strange. Even a newborn's body usually has impurities hindering circulation. Then an amazing possibility crosses his mind. That this young man, Lucian, is the type called a genius. Days pass and Lucian emerges from his room, asking Hans, who was waiting anxiously, if anything happened while he waited. Hans rushes toward him screaming, "Young master," wondering if he has any idea how long he spent inside. Then he breaks into a fit of crying, saying he didn't answer even when called, and because he sternly ordered him not to enter no matter what. He was terrified that something bad happened, and was extremely worried. Lucian looks at him with a calm smile. His appearance notably changed. Hans notices the change. Although sure this is his young master, a nagging feeling tells him it isn't. Lucian smiles to himself, realizing that Hans, who watched Lucian more closely than anyone else, must have sensed something had changed. Lucian acknowledges that the physical body needs time and proper nutrition, so there are no major changes immediately. But what matters is the inside, which is changing incredibly fast. Lucian's innate constitution made this possible. He is now absolutely certain of it. This young man's potential places him in the same rank as the legends who changed the world. He thinks to himself that if he plays his cards right, he can easily surpass his peak power from his mercenary days within 1 year. Then he turns to Hans, saying he owes him for this opportunity, which confuses the servant. Lucian explains that rewards and punishments must always be clear, placing his hand on Hans's shoulder. Then he looks at him seriously with glowing eyes, telling him he will say this only once. Gather everything you have, including your underwear if necessary, and invest everything in the moonlight herb, guaranteeing him a smooth ride to the top. Then he exclaims enthusiastically that they will ascend to the sky together. He smiles, saying he feels jealous of Hans, for in his day, there were no nobles like him offering such opportunities. 1 week later, Lucian and Hans walk in a quiet forest. Lucian feels refreshed, wondering if life is allowed to be this easy. Feasts are served regularly. His room is cleaned without him lifting a finger, and even his bed is prepared for him. It's a completely different world from his previous life, where hunger was part of his daily routine. Thanks to this comfort, he wasn't only able to focus fully on his recovery, but also managed to address the one thing that was weighing on him. At this point in time, the existence of Jake, who was a guard for the Waldeck family, was unknown. He confirmed with the guard captain that no person fitting that description applied for the job, and the guard shift he used to work was occupied by a total stranger. Lucian sees this as for the best. There's no point in meeting his past self. It would be nothing but a distraction, and he lacks the confidence to face his past, for surely he would die of embarrassment. Hans calls out to his master anxiously, wondering if he really intends to go in there. He reminds him that he previously said he wouldn't set foot in the training ground because he hates it so much, which surprises Lucian, who doesn't recall saying that. Hans explains that ever since the second young master treated him harshly during training, he swore he would never return. From Hans's reaction, Lucian forms a rough idea of the situation. Swordsmanship is a required skill for the Grand Duke's sons, so it must have been the perfect opportunity for the second young master, under the guise of swordsmanship training, to instill the fear of violence in young Lucian, and that was the perfect way to ensure he never returned to the training hall again. Lucian reassures Hans, saying he understands why he acted that way, but there's no need to worry, for that is all in the past. All he has to do is trust him and follow his lead. At the entrance of the training hall, a guard hears a voice and asks his colleague if what he's seeing is true. He inquires if the third young master has come here on his own 2 feet, and his colleague confirms it, adding that he is currently walking in the training hall with his personal servant. A mustached man, the swordsmanship instructor, wonders what that bastard is thinking coming here, for it's impossible he forgot what happened that day. Then he smiles a sly smile, thinking this might be for the best. He orders a guard to inform His Highness immediately, vowing he will make sure to cook Lucian thoroughly by the time he arrives. Lucian inspects the training hall with admiration, realizing it exceeds his high expectations. There isn't just an ample supply of spare weapons to use without worrying about breaking them, but also a vast space that doesn't restrict even the most violent movements. It is amazing that a single individual owns a facility like this. He sighs with regret, thinking that if they had trained in a place like this, perhaps more of his men would have survived. Suddenly, the fencing instructor approaches him, saying he didn't imagine things in the end, and that he didn't believe his eyes when he saw the third young master actually here. He reminds him clearly how he ran away and turned tail without looking back after his lesson with Lord Geordie a year ago, just like a little lamb chased by a wolf. Then he asks sarcastically if he is still terrified of this place, to the point that he dragged a servant into this sacred hall of warriors, making Hans shrink into himself from fear. Then the instructor introduces himself as Hendrik and reminds him that a year ago he personally supervised his training on the fencing stance alongside the second young master, wondering if he remembers that. He adds with an arrogant smile that those were truly fun times, recalling how the original Lucian trembled with fear. Lucian looks at the instructor with a cold smile, thinking to himself, "Look at this little bastard. This will be fun." A glimpse is presented into the concept of a knight as the embodiment of honor and loyalty. They are usually born of noble blood, and it is customary for them to master both martial arts and proper etiquette from an early age. And only when they prove their worth on the battlefield or through missions and their achievements are duly recognized, do they finally receive the title of knight from their master and realize the completion of their existence. But Lucian sees that this ultimately means they are no different from hunting dogs wearing expensive collars. For this reason, they are obliged to show courtesy to the master who provides them with wealth and honor, and to his lineage as well. However, Hendrik looks at Lucian with an arrogant attitude. Lucian attributes this partly to Lucian's low status within the family. But he realizes the bigger factor here is his reliance on his backer to act this way. And he thinks to himself that if it were up to him, he would start by reshaping this instructor's mind using some intensive training methods. But he knows the Grand Duke won't stand idly by for something like this. Regardless of everything, a knight is an essential military force and a vital asset to the family, and punishment without formal procedures would create unnecessary friction. Lucian decides the time has not yet come. Lucian addresses the instructor, saying it seems foolish to avoid the training hall just because of what happened in the past, and that he intends to frequent it often from now on, even if only to learn sword forms. He adds that as the instructor said, a year has passed. Shouldn't he move earnestly to catch up? The instructor asks sarcastically if he means sword forms. The instructor laughs loudly, commenting on his skill at joking, and wondering how he wishes to learn sword forms now, when it is already too late. And when Lucian asks why it is too late, the instructor clarifies to him that if he passes the age of 15, the matter can be considered over. He explains that sword forms are secret techniques and a legacy left by their ancestors, and merely imitating the movements grants enlightenment. And the physical body evolves, for it is the essence of ancient wisdom. However, this is only meaningful on the premise that the MANHWA pathway is open. And since this pathway closes starting from the age of 16, training would be no more than mere physical exertion for him. He concludes his speech saying that sword forms without enlightenment are nothing but an empty shell and are no more than a dance. Hendrik adds sarcastically that perhaps dancing is suitable for the young master, suggesting he sees this opportunity to become the #1 dancer in the empire. Then he continues in front of some other knights, saying that this way he would save time and find his true talent, or perhaps he could spend his time gardening. After all, everyone has a role that suits them best. Hendrik smiles triumphantly, commenting that Lucian stands speechless. Internally, Lucian sees that the claim that the MANHWA pathway closes at the age of 16 is a pure lie, and nonsense that can be debunked with a little research, but that doesn't matter. He can pretend ignorance later to settle the matter. The goal behind this lie has already been achieved, showing a fool crushed by his ignorance, unable to utter any rebuttal. A worm mocked by a subordinate, but too terrified to move, thereby displaying his pathetic nature exactly as he was a year ago. However, Lucian surprises everyone by saying calmly that it seems Mr. Hendrik is slightly mistaken. He adds that the MANHWA pathway closes around the age of 25, not 16, and therefore there is no problem in learning even now. Hendrik mocks him, asking if he is sure of his words. Lucian confirms that what he says is an obvious given, then asks if Brother Geordie shares this opinion as well. Hendrik knows that mentioning Geordie's name puts an end to the discussion, for he wouldn't be able to refute his words. So he tells him with full confidence that he did indeed say this. At that moment, Lucian puts his hand on Hans's head, announcing with feigned sorrow that it seems the Waldeck family is doomed. And he asks Hans if he agrees with him, while the terrified servant wonders why he is being dragged into this situation. Lucian explodes into a dramatic act, screaming that it is inconceivable that his brother is confused about a fact even a street dog knows, wondering if this makes sense for his age. He laments how many talents were denied opportunities because of that false knowledge, claiming tears are blurring his vision. Hans and Hendrik run towards him while he pretends to collapse, wondering how his brother could possess such an empty mind. He screams for them not to stop him, for if what the knight says is true, this is a disgrace to the family and a clear crisis. Then he shoots a sharp look at Hendrik, asking in a threatening tone if he is trying to deceive him, the son of his master. Hendrik stammers, denying trying to deceive him. So Lucian backs down, asking him to forget what he said, claiming he misspoke because he couldn't believe the situation. Then he smiles coldly, wondering if it is possible for a knight of the Waldeck family to do something so petty. Hendrik agrees reluctantly, so Lucien confirms he knew that, and that this is a matter that cannot be overlooked easily. He gives him a veiled warning, saying he will teach him what happens when they move their tongues the wrong way. Lucien continues his speech, saying it seems Mr. Hendrik doesn't realize the gravity of this matter. If he only meant to insult him, he would have overlooked it. But the fact that Hendrik and everyone else don't look at him with kindness is the result of his own mistakes, forgetting his duty and wasting time in vain. So how can he reprimand them for that? However, regardless of this, if Hendrik, a knight, and his brother, a pillar of the Grand Duchy, are hindering the recruitment of talent with incorrect knowledge, this is something he cannot turn a blind eye to. This would cause cracks in the military power of the Waldeck Knights, and strictly speaking, might become a grave danger to the safety of the territory's people. As someone bearing the Waldeck name, it is his right to be angry. Internally, Lucien rejoices that he mastered his act. Finally, he asks Hendrik if he understands the seriousness of this issue now, and advises him to prepare for what is coming. Lucien announces he intends to inform his father of this matter and request an internal crackdown. Hendrik panics, wondering why Lucien is escalating the matter to this extent, especially since he used to tremble at the mere hearing of his brother's name. He wonders if this bastard was always like this, for he remembers him as weak as a baby lamb. Now it feels like facing a giant wolf in a dark forest. At that moment, a person dressed in elegant clothes arrives, asking about the reason for all this commotion. Hendrik is surprised by the arrival of Lord Geordie, while Lucien smiles a side smile, considering the timing of his appearance perfect. Geordie Waldeck, the second son, appears with a cold look, commenting on Lucien's presence once again. Hendrik rushes towards Geordie, trying to explain the situation. But Geordie stops him with the word, "enough." He tells him there is no need to explain, for he saw his shameful behavior with his own eyes. He reprimands him for being affected by the words of a child not even half his age, expressing his severe disappointment, and orders him to fix his facial expression. He threatens him not to put him in a more difficult position. Hans feels afraid and whispers to Lucien that Lord Geordie looks really angry, to which Lucien replies with a sly smile that his brother's face is a sight worth watching. Lucien recalls that Geordie Waldeck, the second son, is a true noble among nobles, famous for his bad personality even when he was working as a guard. Since his influence was weaker than the eldest son's, he brought in many outsiders to support his position, but most of them met bad ends, because once he considered them useless, he would frame them for crimes and abandon them. Lucien smiles broadly and greets his brother, asking how he is, to which Geordie replies sharply, "You foolish creature." Lucien asks about the meaning of his sudden words. Geordie clarifies that he watched everything that happened between him and Mr. Hendrik, and that he dared to act in a way that tarnishes the dignity of the Waldeck family. Lucien asks him to clarify his words further, wondering about what tarnished dignity he speaks of. Geordie says sarcastically that it has been a long time since Mr. Hendrik studied theory, and it seems there was a misunderstanding. He adds that using his name to cause unnecessary confusion was a clear mistake for which he cannot be absolved of responsibility. However, he declares he does not intend to reprimand him for this incident, because, unlike Lucien, he knows well the weight of his loyalty and the amount of blood he shed for the Waldeck family. Then Geordie asks Lucien, a person unable to endure basic swordsmanship training, if he thinks he has the right to blame him. He orders him to first learn to respect knights, because thanks to them, the Waldeck family can exist. Then he turns to the other knights, apologizing on his brother's behalf for today's commotion, and asks them to show leniency because it was the mistake of an immature child. He concludes with a malicious smile, vowing he will take special care of his foolish younger brother. Lucien smiles to himself, impressed by his brother's quick wit, for he was the one who actually insulted Hendrik, but Geordie cleverly flips the situation to make it an insult against the knights, saving his own face in the process. Lucien admits to himself saying, "Fine, I'll grant you that," then turns to his brother saying this is what he expected from him. He continues his dramatic act, admitting that although there was a misunderstanding between him and Mr. Hendrik, Geordie should have rightfully reprimanded him for daring to insult him. But instead, he gave him valuable teachings. Hans whispers in terror, asking his master to be quiet, while Lucien continues provoking his brother, describing his head as just an empty skull. Geordie tenses up but keeps his cool, while Lucien continues commenting that he feels ashamed of himself for uttering such embarrassing words. He screams with feigned enthusiasm that this brother learns from his brother's nobility again today, and orders Hans to record his brother's teachings immediately, not on paper but on the finest silk. Meanwhile, our hero thinks to himself that he will use Geordie to erase his weak image and carve a distinct presence in everyone's minds, and to prove that the third young master of the past no longer exists. After finishing his speech, Lucien asks for permission to leave. He adds that prolonging this situation won't benefit either of them. Geordie gets angry, wondering if he thinks he can simply leave like this, but Lucian confronts him. He reminds him that their father has been watching him lately. He adds that he has nothing to lose, unlike his brother. Then he takes his silence as agreement. He bids him farewell while grabbing Hans and fleeing quickly, while Hans screams in panic. Hendrik asks Jordi if it is really okay to let him go like this. Jordi stands silent, a dark aura surrounding him. As they walk away, Hans asks anxiously if they will be okay, reminding Lucian of Lord Jordi's personality well. He starts crying, certain that Jordi won't let this slide, and that scary mustached knight will make him disappear without a trace. Lucian calms him down, but admits to himself that Hans is right, and that only those who have experienced it know that feeling. The bad feeling one gets when an incompetent boss creates a mess and then feigns ignorance. Lucian smiles and reassures Hans that won't happen, and that a mere knight wouldn't dare commit such an act, and that he himself won't allow that to happen. Then he apologizes to Hans, admitting he suffered a lot because of him. For when the master acts like a fool, it is the subordinates who suffer the most. And since Hans is his personal servant, it must have been worse for him. Then he promises him one thing, that from now on, he will not let his men be ignored or tremble in fear because of his foolish actions. He shakes his hand saying, "So let's do our best together, Hans."